Down. Good morning. We are very privileged to have Dr. Ramachandra Guha with us today. He's one of our country's eminent historians and a very distinguished public intellectual. As many of you will know, he's written across a wide range of subjects, displaying a breadth of mastery that's really unusual. Can everyone hear me? He's also the recipient of many prestigious awards, has written many books, and his awards include the Padma Bhushan. And you can see from the number of people cramming the room, the status he enjoys among Indian scholars and speakers. In today's program, he's going to be speaking briefly about his work and the influences on his work, following which there will be a question and answer session moderated by our very own Shashank Kumar. For those of you who don't know Shashank, he's a member of the SLS faculty, the School of Liberal Studies faculty, and teaches the first year seminar, a course called Reading Nehru. So Shashank will be moderating the questions. And I should also say that this program has been organized by the Academic Resource Center of the Somapura SLS unit. Before this, we've had Dr. Janaki Nair speak to us, and our next big speaker is Dr. Guha. So I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Guha and to Shashank.
Thank you, Shonali. Thank you all for coming here. I was last year, I think about 3 or 4 years ago, before the undergraduate program started. So I was asked to speak a little bit about the influences on my work, to somewhat autobiographical vein. Well, what I am today and what I have done or not done is a result of more or less 5 accidents. As a historian and as a social scientist, one is taught to think that how individuals act and behave is determined by complex social phenomenon. The class or caste you are born in, the social structure you come to inhabit, the economic and political changes around you and so on. But accident also plays a very important role in a person's history and sometimes even in a culture or nation's history. So I'll tell you about 5 accidents that have determined my life. The first accident happened, these are accidents stroke incidents, but if I was to give an order to, what I have done in the last 5.5 decades, these 5 accidents are really very important. The first accident happened when I was probably 5 or 6 years old, and I don't remember it. But I was playing cricket with my father. That's something which at least many young Indians still do. I was playing cricket with my father, and watching me was my uncle, my mother's brother. My mother's brother, who is now 79, has had a lifelong fascination stroke obsession with cricket. He played for Delhi University. For the last 40 years, he has run one of Bangalore's best clubs. It's called the Friends Union Cricket Club. It is in the first division of the Karnataka League. It's often been champion. It's produced about 20 Ranji Trophy cricketers and 2 international cricketers, all nurtured by my uncle. Now, my uncle has done all this despite having effectively one hand. His right hand was deformed due to a childhood accident, and he was a left-arm spinner, and he would catch, with one hand, and he played a good quality of cricket. So when I was 5, I was playing with my father in the garden, and according to him, I bowled my father a leg break, which he played. My father was a decent club cricketer too. And then I bowled him a googly and bowled him through the gate. And my uncle saw his nephew. My uncle, by the way, has no children. So he saw his nephew at the age of 5, according to him, with a perfect command of a leg break and a googly, and said, "This boy has talent. Unlike me, this boy has 2 legs and 2 arms. I'm going to make him a test cricketer." So I became the object of my uncle's ambition, and of course of his affection. And between the ages of 11 and 21, all I wanted to do was to play cricket for India. I grew up with an interest in books, so I used to read. But I was obsessed with cricket. And because I read, I also wrote, I edited the school magazine. I had to face the choice of what to study in college. I mean, those of you who are at APU are lucky in a way in that I suppose you can decide your majors in your second or third year, but in the old days, and in fact in many parts of India till today, you have to declare your major the day you enter college. In my case, you were 15 when you entered university. I come from a family of scientists. My father is a PhD, was a PhD, my grandfather was a PhD, my uncles, my cousins, I come from a family of scientists. However, the uncle of mine who was a cricketer told me, if you do science, you can't play cricket because you have practicals in the afternoon and so you can't go for practice in the college. My uncle wanted me to go to St. Stephen's College, which is where he studied, and I was, adored him, and in Indian culture, particularly mamas are very important. He was my mother's brother and he was devoted to me. And I liked cricket. I mean, I also enjoyed cricket, watching, playing, reading about it. So science was ruled out. Now, what would I study? Now, I suppose left to myself, I might have thought of literature. But back in 1974, literature was a subject only girls did before they got married. So my family, who was in any case appalled that I did not do science, because I was quite good at science. I mean, actually I had very good grades in chemistry. And my father was a chemist, and my grandfather was also a chemist. And my uncle founded the National Chemical Laboratory in Pune. So, in theory, I could have done chemistry, but my uncle had said, you can't play cricket if you do science. And I was too scared to do English. So I registered for economics, solely on the grounds, I knew nothing about economics, solely on the grounds that a cousin had made a respectable career as an economist, and my family wouldn't object. So I went to St. Stephen's College, joined it in 1974, ostensibly to study economics, but actually to try and play cricket for India. So in the morning there was classes, in the afternoon there was practice. St. Stephen's then had the best college team in India. Two of my teammates went to play for the country, to play Test cricket. Arun Lal, who is now a well-known commentator, and Kirti Azad, who was in the 1983 World Cup squad. So, and several Ranji Trophy players also were in the team. So in the first week, I attended a few classes before going for practice. And within a week, I knew economics was not for me. And within a year, it was clear that I was not for economics either. But I played cricket, I loved it, I loved undergraduate life like all of you do. I mean, you make friends, you're away from your family, you have classmates from all over the country. Delhi University was a really good campus, university. You had many undergraduate colleges, postgraduate colleges, wonderful place to grow up. So I did a BA, got a sort of a low second class, but wanted to play 2 more years of cricket. So I told my father, who was a very tolerant man, I said, Appa, I want to play some more cricket. He said, fine. He said, university life is about more than getting first classes, so go and play 2 more years of cricket, even though I knew economics was not for me, and vice versa. So I did an MA, and while I did my MA, it dawned on me that it was impossible for me to realize my childhood ambition of playing cricket for India. For one thing, there were many others who shared that ambition. And for another thing, I was simply not good enough. So when I was in my MA final, I realized, at best I could play for, some lowly Ranji Trophy team like Tripura, Assam, or Himachal Pradesh, but that's about it. And I was getting a low second degree in economics, and I started looking for something else to do. And fortunately, at that stage, I discovered the works of an anthropologist called Verrier Elwin. My college had a good library. Somebody had told me about Elwin. I read his books, and I got enchanted by what he had done, and especially by the way in which he narrated his scholarly and personal experiences. Elwin was an Englishman, an Oxford scholar who came here as a missionary, met Gandhi, left the church, then made her life living with the Adivasis of central India and became their foremost expert and ethnographer. So here I thought was possibly a chance of redeeming myself. I come from a family of scholars, as I've already told you. I had failed in economics, so maybe I could do sociology or anthropology. So I took a year off. My grades were not good enough to get me into the Delhi School of Sociology, but the IIM in Calcutta, the Indian Institute of Management in Calcutta, had a small program which gave me admission. At the same time, I also got admission in the Institute of Rural Management in Anand, in their first batch. Now, the faculty in the APU might remember it, and the students are too young, but in the early 70s, Shyam Benegal had made a wonderful film called Manthan about milk cooperatives. And there was a lot of idealism about cooperatives as a way of enhancing rural incomes, emancipating the peasantry. And the people at Anand, who were starting the Institute of Rural Management, were incredibly idealistic. And I was 20, I was also idealistic. And I got into both the PhD program in sociology at IIM Calcutta and the rural management program at Anand. And I was inclined towards Anand when accident number 2 happened. It was as follows. I had fallen in love. That's not an accident, I know. And my girlfriend, who's now my wife, was studying design at the National Institute of Design in Ahmedabad. And I had to choose between Anand and a life of social activism, or constructive social activism, building cooperatives, and becoming a scholar. And my girlfriend Sujata said, look, if you want to marry me, here's the thing, that I'm a designer. I'm a graphic designer. She was studying graphic design at the NID. Designers can only get jobs in cities. They can't get jobs in small towns or in villages. So, you know, she didn't coerce me or she didn't force me. She just said, if you join Anand, you'll be in a village. If you become an academic, you'll be somewhere where a designer can work. So that was accident number 2. So instead of following my instincts, or one part of my heart and going to do rural management, I followed the other part of my heart and went off to Calcutta to study sociology. Now, I went to study sociology blind. After reading Elwin, I knew that I was interested in this. But would sociology be interested in me, was the question. And there's a famous statement, famous to me, not famous otherwise, I made it famous, but it's true, where when one of my teachers at the Delhi School of Economics heard I had shifted subjects and was doing a PhD in sociology, he said, that's a Pareto optimum, good for Guha and better for economics. So anyway, I went to the IIM, and the IIM was a strange place. I mean, I've written an essay which some of you might have seen called An Anthropologist Among the Marxists about my field work there. It's a strange place because everyone, you see, they had their main program was their PGP program, their MBA program. So they had about 250 students, now they have about 600. Basically people wanting to join the corporate sector and get good jobs in, you know, Hindustan Lever, Goldman Sachs and so on. And they had a small doctoral program, mostly of people who had not got into the MBA program. And there were 2 or 3 oddballs. There were 2 friends of mine who were doing a doctorate in economics, who were both IIT students who wanted to transfer to economics, and IIM Calcutta allowed it. And there was me, who was a sociology student, an economics student, wanting to shift to sociology. The university system did not allow it, so I landed up in the IIM. So out of 300 students, there were 3 people who did not want to make it to Fortune 500, basically. So, but because I was isolated, I had time to study. I mean, this is an important lesson for all of you, I think young people. Being with yourself is a wonderful way of growing intellectually, emotionally, culturally. You know, but I was in St. Stephen's. You know, either I was playing cricket, or I was debating, or I was quizzing, or I was hanging out with friends, or I was playing bridge. I never had time to myself. At the IIM, I had no one to talk to because, you know, I had no interest in getting to the Fortune 500. So I discovered the resources of their library. I also had a wonderful teacher, the late Anjan Ghosh, who was a wonderful mentor, who was a young scholar who is no longer alive, and who really taught me the rudiments of sociology in a very systematic and thorough way. So now I had to, the IIM, the advantage of the IIM for me was that it was run, the doctoral program was run on the American pattern. 2 years of coursework. And Anjan Ghosh and his colleagues had designed very good courses. So even though I had no background in sociology, I could make up. So I studied sociology hard for 2 years. Now I had to decide what thesis to do. This is where accident number 3 happened. There was a professor from Bangalore, as it happens, I am Bangalore, visiting Calcutta. He gave a talk, and I started chatting to him afterwards, and I was confused as to what kind of topic to choose for my PhD. And he said, where are you from? I said, I'm from Dehradun. I was born and raised in the sub-Himalayan town of Dehradun. And he said, you're from Dehradun? Why don't you do a sociology of the Chipko movement? This was 1981. The Chipko movement had broken out only 8 years previously. It was, as you know, a peasant resistance movement for the protection of forests in the Garhwal Himalaya, just a few hours north of Dehradun. So I said, fantastic idea. And if I had not met this person, Jayanto Bandyopadhyay, I would have done some very standard mainstream thesis. I would have written the 400 thesis on caste in India, or the 200 thesis on the industrial working class. So that was accident number 3. So I started studying the Chipko movement. And I went to do field work. Sociologists and anthropologists base their research on field work. So my intention was to do in-depth field work in the villages affected by the Chipko movement. The Chipko movement already had several factions that were important in different parts of the Himalaya. One was active in the Bhagirathi Valley, another in the Alaknanda Valley, a third in Kumaon. So I had to do three spells of field work to understand the different sociological and ideological dimensions of these factions and so on. Now, in the first spell of field work, I went to a village called Mandal. Mandal is on the old pilgrim route to Badrinath. It's about 4 or 5 days march short of Badrinath, deep in the interior, past Rudraprayag and Srinagar and Gopeshwar. And that's where the first Chipko agitation took place. And I was talking to the head man, whose name was Alam Singh Bisht, who was involved in that agitation. And while I was talking to him on a rock overlooking the Alaknanda, he told me this story. He said, Chipko is not new. He said this in Hindi, but I'll repeat it in English for those of you, who are not comfortable in Hindi. He said, 8 years ago, we, told the forest department that they couldn't log our trees because these forests belong to us. But this is not new. 100 years ago, an Englishman called Wyndham came to take away our forests on behalf of the state, and we said these forests belong to us. So we caught that English commissioner, put him on a horse, painted his face black, branded his forehead with a cattle iron, put him upside down on a donkey, and sent him out of the district. That was a fantastic story. So I said, is there any validity to it? And it so happened I had got interested in the history of forests from the 19th century. And following this story, I went to a friend who was a historian, and I said, take me to the National Archives, because no part of my training as a sociologist had involved archival work. Sociologists don't do archival work, they only do field work. So this friend took me to the National Archives, and he said, here are the files on the forest department, see what you find. So I ordered some files, and I found something absolutely fascinating. That headman of Mandal had told me a story that was completely accurate in essence, if slightly divergent in details. He had claimed that it was an English commissioner called Wyndham who had come to the Bhagirathi Valley, to the Alaknanda Valley. Actually, it was an Indian forest officer called Kesavanand Mamgayan who had come to the Bhagirathi Valley to the west to take over the forests on behalf of the Maharaja of Tehri Garhwal and exploit them for commercial purposes and deny the peasants their rights. And the peasants had protested, and they had indeed, in a classic mark of peasant humiliating authority, branded his head with a cattle iron, put him on a donkey and turned him upside down and pushed him out of the district. So it's quite extraordinary. This incident had happened in 1906 near a famous temple called Chandrabadni in Tehri, and it had been transposed in folk memory about 80 miles to the east, where it had been an Englishman, not an Indian, who had been subjected to that humiliating treatment. But this got me absolutely fascinated. I said, look, there must be much more in the archives. And I went and dug more in Delhi. I went to Lucknow, I went to Dehradun, and I got absolutely fascinated by and totally absorbed by the joys of archival research, partly because I was discovering this long prehistory of the Chipko movement, that from the 19th century, there had been periodic peasant protests against state authority on the question of who owned the forests, the government or the village community. So I was fascinated by this. And I also found that I was temperamentally much better suited. I was much better suited to archival research than to field work. It's much easier conversing with dead documents than with living people. At least in my experience. They don't answer back, for one thing. Right? All right. So I became a historian. So these are 4 accidents I've told you about. My uncle making me a cricketer. Now, by the way, in retrospect, I'm deeply grateful to my uncle for 2 reasons. One is because I wasn't really very good as a cricketer, I had to practice twice as hard as anyone else in the cricket team. I mean, Arun Lal could bunk practice, but I couldn't. And it was a kind of a recipe for hard work. I mean, one of the reasons when I go to the archives, I never leave, is because I had to bowl 4 hours in the nets to get into the college team. You know, this may sound somewhat facile, but I think those of you who grew up trying to learn music or dance, you know, will have similar experiences as you go through life. And the other, of course, good thing about trying to be a cricketer and failing is that participating in a team sport when you're young, I think is fantastic training for life. Anyway, so that was accident number 1. The accident number 2 was my wife sending me to, my girlfriend sending me to Calcutta instead of Anand. Accident number 3 was meeting Professor Jayanto Bandyopadhyay, who said, study the Chipko movement. Accident number 4 was meeting this peasant who told me, you think it happened yesterday? It happened 100 years ago. This is how it happened. Now, as a result of this, over a period of time, I gradually became a historian. I mean, more of a historian. I still think there is something of the sociologist in me, perhaps. And then, because of my work on the Chipko movement, I got increasingly interested in environmental history and wrote a series of books in environmental history. Now, I'm going to come to accident number 5. And that's more or less the last accident I want to tell you about before we go into a discussion which I hope will be much broader and not restricted to autobiographical memories, however peculiar or amusing they may be. Now, I was getting slightly tired of environmental research. You know, I started as an environmental researcher in 1981. I had done about 20 years of work. I'd published several books. I was exhausted. I had nothing new to say. There was a wonderful group of young environmental historians coming along who were doing much more interesting and sophisticated work than I had done. And I, as a way of moving away and finding something fresh and exciting to do, I was writing a social history of cricket. I had stumbled across this fascinating character called Palwankar Balu, who was a Dalit, who became a famous cricketer, and whose achievements in the cricket field were also a vehicle for his personal social emancipation and for generating a wider social consciousness among the Dalits of Western India. It's a story I've told at great length, so I won't repeat it. Anyway, so I wrote an essay based on my early work on Palwankar Balu and the links between sport on the one hand and caste, religion, and nation building on the other. So I wrote a social history of Indian cricket in the form of a long essay. It was called Cricket and Politics in Colonial India, and it was published in the historical journal Past and Present in the year 1998. And I was thinking of converting that into a full-fledged book. Now, shortly after I published that essay, I got a call from a publisher in London. And he said, I want to meet you. So I have no harm at all in meeting anyone who calls you. So I went to meet him. And when I went to meet him, his name was Peter Strauss. He then used to run Picador, which is a well-known, as you know, a well-known literary publishing house in London. He was carrying a copy of Past and Present with my essay in it. And he said, what are you doing now? I said, I'm converting that into a book. I have material for a full-fledged history of, social history of cricket in colonial India, and the linkages between sport on the one hand and religion, caste, nation building on the other. He said, no, don't do that. He said, write a history of independent India. I said, what? This was 1998. He said, yes. He said, it's 50 years since your nation achieved independence. That's enough time to look back. I am told there are no histories of independent India. And of course, he was right, because in the definition of the academy, when the clock struck midnight on 15th August 1947, history ended and sociology began. So he said, he was a kind of a visionary publisher. He said, look, I'm told there are no histories of independent India. 50 years is a long time. It's a complex, interesting journey. Now India is becoming increasingly part of the global economy. There's a story to tell of how it began, how it was founded. You clearly enjoy archival research. You clearly write well. Write a history of independent India. and I will give you 3 weeks to consider it. So I went back to Bangalore, and 3 weeks later he rang up. And I'd been thinking seriously about it, and it struck me that it indeed was an interesting and an idea that intrigued and interested me. So I embarked on the writing of India After Gandhi, which would never have been begun, let alone written, had it not been for a visionary publisher called Peter Strauss, and had it not been for the fact that, unlike many other publishers, Peter Strauss actually read academic journals. He had studied history in Cambridge, which has an outstanding history department, and had left Cambridge with a life subscription to past and present. And had seen this essay, had recognized that India was a large, complex country whose colonial history was well told, but whose modern history was just beginning to be understood, and reached out to me. Now, I spent a long time writing India After Gandhi. It was, without question, the most difficult challenge I've ever faced or will face. And I'm deeply grateful to Peter Strauss for giving me the chance to write it, but it was enormous hard work, both archival and conceptual. You know, how do you slice this complex history? How do you bring it in one book? What do you leave out? What are your benchmarks? What themes must you cover intensively? What less extensively? How do you frame each chapter? How does chapter 1 lead to chapter 2 and so on? It was an enormous challenge. And for many years, the file in my computer containing my notes, my drafts of what was to become India After Gandhi, carried that file carried that title, that folder carried the title, Mythical History Book, because I thought I would never write it. It was so complicated. And in retrospect, I couldn't write it now. I mean, Peter Strauss's invitation or challenge came at a very opportune time for me, which was I was in my 40s. So I'd already done some serious research. You know, I'd written some important books, and I knew what it took to take on a bigger challenge. And I had the energy to go do all the research for it. I mean, I couldn't do it now. I mean, impossible. But writing India After Gandhi moved me away from environmental research, from the history of cricket, into the history of Indian democracy, which is what I've been doing for the last 15 or 20 years. So it's really a series of accidents. You know, I've been very fortunate and lucky in that, having met the right people who have guided me in, in certain ways, in the most appropriate directions, so that I could do, the kinds of things I've done. I've told you about 5 accidents. I'm going to end with the last, which may be the most fortunate of all. And that is the fortune or the accident or the sort of contingency of having been born and raised a citizen of India. Because India is at times, the most exasperating country in the world, but it's without question the most interesting. As a historian, if there's a second life, I would like to be born in India. Surely, if I wanted a more humane, dignified existence for myself and my family, maybe I'd move somewhere else. But I think the kind of challenges that India poses to a scholar, and indeed to anyone, not just a scholar, anyone who has to deal with words and images, with artists, with writers, with filmmakers. And I'll just end with one last story, and then we'll open it up. I forget the year, but about 10 or 12 years ago, Salman Rushdie published a book called The Ground Beneath Her Feet, which was partly about music. A month after that, Vikram Seth published A Suitable Music, which was only about music. And I remember watching an interview where Vikram Seth was being interviewed by some BBC or some foreign channel. And this interviewer asked him, he said, "Isn't it a strange coincidence? Isn't it odd that in the same year, indeed in the same quarter, 2 Indian historians have published books on music? Isn't it strange?" So Vikram Seth said, "How can it be strange?" He said, "Now," Vikram Seth said, "now, supposing in the same year, 2 Norwegian historians had written a history of the pencil, that would be strange. Music is a universal subject. India is a universal subject. What can be strange about 2 Indian novelists writing books on music in the same year?" So that's how I feel about, in a sense, the most happy accident of all for me. I mean, this is not an endorsement of what the Republic of India does or what the government of India does. It's simply a statement of how endlessly fascinating and challenging it is to be a scholar and a writer in India. Thank you.
Hello.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for the talk. So before we open it up for discussion, I just wanted to say a few things. So the idea behind organizing this kind of interaction, it really began sometime in June this year when we were in the process of launching the undergraduate program. So as a part of the undergraduate program, our students do a course in their first semester, which is all about engaging with texts. It's about developing an appreciation for reading, and reading not just being instrumental, but as something that helps us to make meaning and that helps us to make informed opinions about the world. So we felt that one of the ways in which this learning experience could be enhanced was by actually having an opportunity to interact with somebody who has actually written something and spent a large part of their life creating text, so to speak. And so that the postgraduate students don't feel left out. I'm surprised to see many of you here. You're supposed to be in class. But I think one of the things that is constantly being talked about by faculty members and students in the postgraduate program is about this role that reading plays in our experience of study, especially in a university like APU where we are completely moving away from a conventional system of examination and notes, and a lot of responsibilities on the student to make your own meaning and engage. So all of that being said, as part of preparing for this talk, a number of students in the undergraduate program have actually engaged with your work and have come up with questions. And we felt that we anticipated it would be a large crowd. So one way in which we felt we could have the Q&A in a more manageable format was to actually have a list of questions. So I don't have the questions with me, the students will ask them to you, but I have the names. And broadly, the questions fall into 3 categories. There's a whole list set of questions about Nehru, your opinion on Nehru, what you've written about him, his place in Indian history. There's a whole bunch of questions relating to the process of writing of history, working as an author. So that's one set. And there are a set of uncategorized questions some on environment and gender and some other things. So I have the names of students here, and I felt maybe you could take 2 or 3 questions at a time. So would you like to take some questions on Nehru first?
Sure.
Okay, so Arjun, Angelina, and Triveni. If you could just pass the mic.
I have it.
You can pass
Your piece of paper.
Angelina.
Yeah, just
You can write on the back.
You don't need?
Just get my notebook near the laptop.
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Is the democratic system working today in a way that was envisioned during Jawaharlal Nehru's tenure as Prime Minister?
Okay. You want to take some more questions? Some more questions? Answer that?
We could take
Yeah.
3 or 4.
You had written that Nehru had a certain disregard for primary education in India, but I think there's not enough amount of condemnation for that. So do you think there should be more condemnation about this little flaw in his nation-building time, because it has had a very terrible effect on the nation? So what do you think about that?
And loudly, please.
And also being recorded, yeah. Go ahead.
After doing research on Nehru, have you ever come across his decisions on which you don't agree?
Don't agree?
Yeah.
Yeah.
From what I've seen, we Indians generally we generally have a tendency to protest, declare bunds, and write about things. And also they look at the things that the government do as something that they cannot, partly influence. So how do you think we can make the people in our country realize that the government is something they can actually work with, and it's something that they create?
Thanks. Family. So the first and the last deal with democracy as envisaged in 1950 and democracy as it is actually played out today. Nehru had an important role to play in the conception of democracy, but so did many others. And particularly B.R. Ambedkar would be another one I think it's important to recognize. In the conception of democracy as enunciated by the Constitution in the 50s, I think Parliament had a very important role, and debate and discussion in the Parliament had an important role. It doesn't really anymore. The sociologist Andre Bethe, who's one of my great intellectual heroes, makes a distinction between what he calls constitutional democracy and populist democracy. So constitutional democracy is based on discussion, debate in Parliament, leading to laws that are then refined and so on. And populist democracy is the language of the streets and protests and bands. And Andre Bethe argues that India is different from the West. In the West, there is hardly any populist democracy. Everything is conducted, in Parliament and the ministries. So we need a balance. And maybe in the 50s and 60s, it was too much oriented towards the constitutional democracy, and ministers and MPs had too much of a role, and the ordinary public didn't. And now the balance may have been reversed. I think it's important today that we restore the sanctity of Parliament. We restore trust between government and opposition, where there is debate and dialogue, not demonizing and calling of names. And I think both Nehru and Ambedkar would have been appalled by the degeneration of political discourse in India and the kind of vituperative abuse that goes around in the name of, party point scoring. Now, the second and the third questions, primary education and decisions of Nehru that I may have disagreed with, have to do with, understanding Nehru's successes and failures. In the introduction to India after Gandhi, I quote a line of the 19th century Cambridge historian, F.W. Maitland, where he says, "That which is now in the past was once in the future." I'd like to repeat it. That which is now in the past was once in the future. That's a very important maxim that every historian must follow. You try to understand what Nehru did in 1948 or 1950, or what Indira Gandhi did in 1971, you have to look at what was the nature of evidence available in 1971. What were the debates, what were the trends, what were the prejudices, what were the dominant currents, and then try and understand that. If you apply that model to Nehru, then I think post facto criticism of his economic policy is plainly wrong. In the 1950s, the whole world was going in towards a mixed economy. 23 out of 24 economists consulted by the Planning Commission approved a strong state model. Even the businessmen, the Tatas and the Birlas, wanted the state to intervene to protect them against foreign competition. They wanted the state to build infrastructure because they did not have capital. So this is plainly wrong. So there are many aspects in what Nehru did where it is post facto criticism, which is unfair and unjust and unhistorical. But on the question of primary education, I think there was a conceptual blind spot. Because, of course, Nehru was enchanted by science and cutting-edge research, and we must be grateful to him for sustaining the IITs and the TIFRs and so on. But had Gandhi been alive another 5 or 10 years, Gandhi may have recognized, Gandhi was a much more grounded person, and the importance of educating everyone. Also in the 1940s, we had a reservoir of social capital in thousands of idealistic social activists who had come up to the national movement, who were willing to work for the nation, principled civil servants, and all this could have been used, I think, more effectively. And that, I would still say, is Nehru's, unlike economic policy or Kashmir or whatever else he's accused of, which often is, he was doing things that he thought were best at the time, based on the knowledge available at the time, and it's easy to knock him 70 years later. Primary education, I think, was a genuine conceptual blind spot in him. Likewise, the question you raised about while doing research on Nehru, what did you understand, what did you not understand? One of the most difficult, you see, I am both a historian and a biographer, so it's important to understand individuals' motivations, and most of my work has gone between history and biography. I think I can understand why Nehru went to the UN, by the way. This is something he's massively criticized for over Kashmir. I can understand that. India had joined the Committee of Nations. We had to believe in international law. There was another country that attacked us, and you could go to UN. Also a plebiscite. People forget the context. Kashmir was Junagadh in reverse. Junagadh was a state with a Hindu population ruled by a Muslim Nawab who acceded to Pakistan. And to show how false it was, Patel actually sent in the troops, organized a plebiscite where the Hindu majority voted to join India. So Kashmir was exactly that. In reverse, having done that in Junagadh, could we say we won't do that in Kashmir? Of course, we laid down certain conditions which were there must be peace, the Pakistani army must vacate, and when they never did that, we said we don't believe in the plebiscite. Likewise with economic policy. So there are many decisions of Nehru which are, you can see as having been logical at the time. What was puzzling to me was one, at the level of policy, primary education, and at the level of biography or personality, Nehru's extraordinary trust in Krishna Menon, who was his defense minister, and who clearly was totally incompetent for the job. You know, he had messed around with the army. The greatest general India has had since independence, Thimmaiya, actually resigned because of the way he'd been ill-treated by his minister. There was loss of morale in the staff, and we want, and so on. And that's something which a future biographer will have to properly, why did, it's like, I mean, there are examples of this. There are examples of good leaders or powerful leaders having blind spots, trusting people they shouldn't have trusted. Nehru and Krishna Menon is one. I mean, if I may bring it down to the present, or move on. I mean, why did Indira Gandhi trust Sanjay Gandhi so much? Why does Narendra Modi trust Amit Shah so much? Now, this is a question a future historian would have to answer, because clearly, Amit Shah, from all one knows of him, you see, I think, let me answer this briefly. It's possible, I mean, I'm happy to talk about Narendra Modi later, but it's possible to argue that, it's possible, Narendra Modi is a very polarizing figure. Let me not polarize it. Let me say, it's possible to argue that what happened in Gujarat in 2002 was a lapse of judgment, but he couldn't really contain it, he was new to the job. It's possible to argue that as he matured, he lost his sectarian tag, he's really interested in development, and he's committed to, inclusive growth. All this is possible to argue. And some of the things he's done and said since the last 4 or 5 years, you could have a more, less jaundiced view of Narendra Modi's politics. But with Amit Shah, the evidence is all clear. He is ruthless and instrumental in the same way as Sanjay Gandhi was. And he may be very good at winning elections, but in the process, he may tear apart society. So these are questions likewise with Krishna Menon. Why does, these are things that you will find through history, that it's something to do with the isolation of a leader. You're prime minister, you don't get feedback from people. I mean, forget, I don't want to make it partisan. Why did Sonia Gandhi trust Ahmed Patel so much? Ahmed Patel was her right-hand man, and she took basically he told her, do this, do that. The coal scam is because of Ahmed Patel, because he advised that certain industrialists close to the Congress party get, contracts. So these are interesting biographical questions that we'd have to ask. And with Nehru, the main one is, why did the crucial sector of defense, when it was clear well before the China War, by 57, 58, it was clear that Krishna Menon was the wrong man. He may have been good as ambassador in England, but he was not good as defense minister. Why did Nehru leave this crucial sector to him is something I think which certainly still puzzles me.
Shivani, Sahana, Shabil, Shruti. Are you asking or is Hemant?
Yeah. So could you compare and comment upon the past and future of our Indian National Congress?
Yeah.
So we're from the Language in India class. So one question I wanted to ask you was, how do you think the media played a role when Nehru was appearing to making such an iconic figure amongst the Indians?
Yeah.
What do you think Nehru was responsible for the socialist economy of India? To what extent was it good or bad?
I think I've already answered that. I don't believe Nehru was responsible. It was the current of the times. I mean, most intellectuals and economists felt like that. He was one of them. Yeah.
Hi. In your view, what are the differences between people's motivation for participating in politics compared to the time of Nehru and now?
Yeah.
Guha, Nehru tried to dominate or oppress other voices within the Congress party, which was the Prime Minister of India.
Yeah.
Do you think that Nehru was an unworthy successor to Gandhi? And do you agree that he betrayed Gandhi's policies after becoming the PM?
Yeah. And again, let me start, but this time let me reverse it and start with the biographical part. So, you know, in the course of my research, I came across a wonderful letter which I've never used. I may have quoted an article, but I never used in my books. And it was written to Chakravarti Rajagopalachari, Rajaji, by just some ordinary citizen, by an Aam Aadmi. And in that letter he said, he said, I mean, he talked about Patel, Rajagopalachari and Nehru. He said these were Gandhi's three great disciples. And he said, you were the head, the heart and the hand of Gandhiji. Rajaji being the head, Nehru being the heart, and Patel being the hand. And it's a fantastic image. I mean, if I was to look at Gandhi and his, it's a wonderful image. Nehru, in terms of the heart, he was with Gandhi, particularly the question of linguistic and religious pluralism. You know, that's why Nehru was willing to give his life to defend the rights of minorities. That's why Nehru never imposed English on North India, things that Patel would have done. So Rajaji was the head. You know, he had a complex intellectual understanding of, you know, politics, democracy, and Patel was the hand, the person who did things. And it so happened that, you know, Patel died in 1950, and Rajaji left the Congress. So in a sense, it's true that Nehru did not have opposition in the Congress party, and good opposition, like capable. Of course, there were many remarkable people. There was Kamaraj, who, you know, was a quite extraordinary person from a backward class background who had, you know, come his way up. There were other people like Y.V. Chavan and so on. But it's possible that someone like Rajagopalachari, who, if he had stayed in the Congress, could have been a good constraining influence on Nehru. Now, the question of what is the future of the Indian National Congress, you know, I normally don't go into speculation. I've often said that a historian is not an astrologer, although becoming an astrologer will be a profitable change of profession for me. I've often said that. And I very rarely said it. But of the Congress party, I have said that the Congress party cannot revive under Rahul Gandhi. And I've also said further that the Congress party is likely to go the way of the British Liberal Party, which was a colossal, which dominated modern Britain, you know, from the 19th century up to the early 20th century, and now is an insignificant player. The question of, you know, the very important question of democracy and popular participation. How has democracy changed? I think, again, in many ways it's changed for the better. Many more people participate in politics. You know, voting rates are going up consistently. And the fact that Dalits and Adivasis vote in larger numbers than the ordinary upper caste people tells you that people have a stake in democracy. The fact that in Naxalite areas, the Adivasi women defy the Naxalites and go and vote. The fact that after the demolition of the Babri Masjid, Muslims wanted to vote more. You know, the fact that across India, women do not listen to their husbands. I mean, in Bihar, it will be interesting to see what's happening. Because I think in the 50s and 60s, not just women, you know, women voted as their husbands told them to. You know, tenants voted as the landlords told them to. No, all this is changing. I mean, the fact is today in India, a large number of citizens vote according to their individual preference, and that's quite extraordinary. This is new in Indian history. But as regards the caliber of our political leadership, has politics declined? That's a different question. So, you know, the interesting thing about history is that change is never unilinear. You know, sometimes, you know, even judged by objective standards of democracy, pluralism, inclusion, equality, you know, society moves in a zigzag way. Some things become better, some things become worse. I mean, I believe that, broadly speaking, the individual incidents of horrific oppression on Dalits. But broadly speaking, as a historian, I would argue that Dalits are less oppressed now than they were 50 years ago. But possibly Adivasis are more oppressed. You know, so it always works in a complex way. So, but I think there's a wonderful organization in Bangalore. One of my favorite NGOs is an organization called the Association of Democratic Reforms, based in Bangalore, ADR. I think their website may be ADR-org, but just Google them. They've done fantastic work in trying to understand ways in which promote ways in which you can rid the political system of criminality and corruption, transparent funding, and improve really the quality of people in politics. So that remains a worry. I mean, the fact that young idealistic people will either start a social enterprise or become a social activist rather than enter politics is a question we have to face. Yeah, media. That's an interesting question. Thanks for reminding me. It's again, you need much more detailed research on this. But my sense is that in the 50s and 60s, by and large, the media may have been too deferential, not just to Nehru, but to the government. It's only after the emergency, in the 70s and the 80s, and the flowering of the Indian language media, that you have a more critical, engaged media. There's a fantastic book by Robin Jeffrey on the history of the media. The title of the book escapes me at the moment, but Robin Jeffrey, it's a wonderful account of the efflorescence of investigative journalism in the 80s and 90s. Now the media is more interesting. I mean, maybe there's too much noise, not much enough analysis. There's probably too much of a corporate control over television and print media. So there are questions about the media that leave me uncomfortable. But broadly, I think you're right. In the 50s and 60s, we were too deferential to our political leaders. The media was, that is, yeah.
So now maybe some question on process and writing. So,
Yeah.
Anagha, Anirudh, Abhita, and Aishwarya.
Yeah.
Data is reliable and authentic. And as a follow-up question, have you ever been faced with unreliable data? And if so, what did you do in that situation?
The language and media class, and we talked about bilingualism. And I read an article of yours on a bilingual intellect. So I want to know how much of an impact does a bilingual intellect have in a workplace? And a follow-up to that would be, how would you harness the concept of bilingual intellect in the Indian masses?
Yeah.
Questions. One is, right now, given the constraints of the society, how much freedom do you think does an author have in the line of freedom of expression? And the second one is related to this, that when you know very well that what you write could be controversial later, how do you prepare yourself to face the reaction put by the public?
The language. Yeah, from the language, media, and culture class as well. With reference to your article 7 Threats to Freedom of Expression, we wanted to ask a two-part question on objectivity and subjectivity. So do you think writing subjectively gives different perspectives on a topic for a viewer to choose from? Or do you think it influences people's views and manufacturers' consent? And the second part is, according to you, is it possible for a writer to write objectively with no ideological inclination whatsoever? And if so, do you think that would be a good thing?
Yeah. I wish I had... let me just quickly answer bilingualism one and then come to others. I argue in that essay that bilingualism is declining among intellectuals. So it may be growing among, the everyday population. I mean, an Odia who comes here to work will have to learn Kannada and so on, right? Now, again, this is a word of advice to all. I mean, my greatest deficiency as a writer and a scholar is that I don't know enough languages. I basically know English and Hindi. When my father was alive, he would translate, French and German for me, and occasionally Kannada too, because he knew Kannada as well. In the past, I've had, colleagues or research assistants translate from Tamil or Gujarati, but I feel that lack. I think for any scholar, regardless of whether you're a historian or a sociologist or an anthropologist, indeed for anyone, I mean, I wish my children knew more languages. I think languages are a window into a world. So I think all of you, regardless of whether you're going to become intellectuals and historians or do many other more interesting professions, learn as many languages as you can, as early as you can, because the earlier you learn, the more likely you are to learn them well. So that's all I'd say. And I think that the moment has passed of bilingual. It may revive, but at the moment, clearly they're two separate discourses the way I talked about. Now the question of the other questions which were about objectivity, reliability, or both of data and of the position of the writer. You see, there are two things. One is, They're two separate things. One is how do you approach it as a historian, and how do you approach it as, though I don't like the term, public intellectual. Well, I would say as a journalist. I'm both a historian and a columnist. And they kind of interpenetrate. But as a historian, I think you have to do as deep and wide research as possible. You're not dealing with numbers, you're dealing with opinions. I think a few lessons I've learned is that try to understand what happened in 1954. Look for a contemporary document. Say a person was murdered in 1954. Don't look for someone interviewed 60 years later. Gandhi and Godse, for example, is a great example. At various times you'll have people, I found the person who was the gardener in Birla Bhavan. This happened about 4 or 5 years ago. I read an interview. So-and-so person was the gardener at Birla Bhavan, and this is how he remembers the murder. That's like 65 years later. But if you look at the newspaper accounts of the time, from eyewitnesses, you're likely to get a more authentic account. So the first lesson is, there's a reliable, unreliable for a historian. Look for contemporary accounts. Oral histories can come later as a supplement. Look for a variety of contemporary accounts so that you can judge for biases and perceptions. In the age of social media, of course, it's very hard to judge. I mean, there's so many lies that go around that are often deliberately manufactured. I mean, they're quite astonishing. I mean, one of the ones that has got the most play is that Firoz Gandhi was a Muslim. I mean, this is something which is everywhere, right? And since Firoz Gandhi was a Muslim, Rahul Gandhi is quarter Muslim, and hence he's a foreigner or a Pakistani or God knows what. I mean, I don't know what they're trying to say. But it's not just that. I mean, there's an article which was widely circulating, allegedly written by an interview by Maulana Azad in 1946, which is totally made up. There's a letter that is widely circulating about Nehru written to Attlee in 1946, asking him to kill Bose. Which is totally made up. It's so ungrammatical, and if Nehru knew anything, it was to write English. I mean, that much. So, what future historians will have to do as a judge, what is reliable or unreliable, is a much greater challenge than the one I face. Now, the question of objectivity and subject position and writers' biases, is freedom of expression under greater threat? I gave a long interview to Karan Thapar last night. Do have a look. The link will be up soon, which I discuss today, freedom of expression today versus yesterday in some detail. So have a look. But as far as what are the writer's responsibilities, one of the positions I've long maintained is that a writer, a so-called public intellectual, must never be allied to a political party, and not even to an activist group. You cannot be allied to the Naxalites or to the Narmada Bachao Andolan and have independence of mind. You cannot, let alone the Congress or the BJP or or the Shiv Sena or whatever. You have views. I mean, you have ideas, you have beliefs, you have prejudices, you have preferences. My preferences are for democracy, pluralism, and secularism, right? But I will not support the Congress party. So I think it's very important to have independence. That's the first thing. The second thing, and this is more and more relevant in the age of social media, is that in any political argument, do not attribute personal motives. Take on your opponent's arguments. This happens less and less. I mean, if you take the question of and this is a contemporary thing, so allow me to discuss it. It also has to do with the writers and their position. This thing about the returning of awards, right? Now, many writers have returned awards. It so happens I have not returned my Sahitya Academy Award, and I've explained in my interview in Karan Thapar why I have not explained it. And I respect those who have returned them, and my position is that the award was given to me by a jury of peers, by writers, acting in good faith and autonomy. I didn't seek it. It was not given to me by the Congress party or the BJP. Jury of writers, and the jury was headed by the great Bengali writer Sunil Gangopadhyay, who's now dead. Now, so I think it's disrespectful to the jury to return it. And I also think that as a columnist, I have a medium. I have a weekly column in which I can express my views about growing intolerance. But I respect those writers who returned it. It may be that they don't have a weekly column in which to express their views. It may be that they feel different from me. They are just so I respect that. But don't attribute motives. Now, what has happened is a close friend of mine, who is very closely allied to the BJP. I do have some friends like that, by the way, I should say. A close and old friend of mine, who is very closely allied to the BJP, said, Of course, we should not attribute motives. Okay, then he said, now Ashok Vajpayee has returned the award, and he said, no, I am sure that Ashok Vajpayee is returning the award has nothing to do with the fact that Arjun Singh gave him this job and Sonia Gandhi gave him that job. Now, you're saying all this. You're actually attributing motives by saying, I know what, but I'm sure Ashok Vajpayee is. Now, yesterday, Anupam Kher said, all writers who have returned the awards are motivated. They want to bring down Narendra Modi. How does he know this? Has he talked to each one of them individually? So, it so happens, on the question of returning awards, I'm on the same side. I think that it was a mistake to return. I think it's an insult to the jury, not an insult, that they haven't taken into account the fact that a jury worked patiently and independently to give them the award. But it's their decision. So in any argument, don't personalize, don't impute motives. And of course you'll have biases, but they should not be determined by a political party or an ideology. And you should have values for which you're consistent. In this interview that I gave to Karan Thapar yesterday, I talked about this. One of the problems that liberals who defend freedom of expression face is that they've not been consistent in the past. They shouted loudly about Hussain, and that was good. But they kept quiet about Taslima Nasreen. So I think if you have values, maintain them in a consistent way, and never personalize debate. Never accuse the person you're arguing with or having motives. I think that's what I would say are important lessons. More and more important in the light of the kind of social media world we live in.
Shruti, Maya, Ishwari, Jita.
Nowadays, the religion of the minority people in India in future.
In future, or today? Yeah.
Books. So, which book you enjoy the most while writing and why?
You believe history must stay away from policy making, and historian must keep their distance from politicians. Can you elaborate it more?
Yeah, I think I've made my position clear. I think it's very important that that India remains a plural, diverse country. India is not a Hindu state. It should never become a Hindu Rashtra. And that plurality and diversity is absolutely crucial to defend to the last. That does not mean that I must be quiet when Islamic fundamentalists attack, shall we say, Salman Rushdie or Taslima Nasreen. As a Hindu, I should be, just because I was born a Hindu does not mean I can't criticize that. So I think it's a slightly more, so despite my vigorous defense of pluralism and the rights of minorities, I think when there's minority extremism, I must have the right to, by liberal standpoint, to criticize it as much as I have the right to consistently criticize the excesses of Hindu extremism. Now on writing style and which book did I most like writing? The book I most like writing, I suppose, was my biography of Verrier Elwin, because Elwin changed my life. And without Elwin, if I had not read Elwin, I don't know what I would have done. I may have, I certainly would not have become a scholar if I had not read Elwin. And Elwin changed my life. While working on Elwin, I think expanded my understanding of what it meant to be a foreigner, becoming an Indian. The craft of biography I learned because of working on Elwin. My understanding of the Adivasi predicament, which has stayed a consistent question, my interest in ecology, forestry questions. So I think writing on Elwin my book on Elwin was probably in many ways my favorite book. I mean, I've enjoyed other books too. I think writing, of course, is different. Writing a book, a newspaper article you're writing at once, very quickly. So you're making quick judgments, you're putting a point of view forward, and in the old days, you thought that it didn't matter because the newspaper became raddi. It became a paper bag and was dumped upon, right? But now everything is online, so any mistake is magnified. So you have to be careful and judicious. What I do normally is I show it to a couple of people I trust. Usually it's in the family. It's usually my wife and my son or my daughter if she's around, because they are people I respect, and they often tone down. They have a tendency to tone down some of my impulsive, angry statements. And this is very important in Twitter. If you want to tweet, if you have an angry tweet, you're upset. If you want to tweet emotionally, before you tweet, wait 10 minutes. And preferably, consult someone. consult a close friend, someone you trust. Should I say this or should I not say this? After 10 minutes, you may still be angry, rightfully, but wait 10 minutes. So I think this is so. I think you have to. But I think a book gives you the luxury and the pleasure and the intellectual challenge of working something out seriously, in depth, and so in that way, obviously, it's more arduous, it's more challenging, but ultimately it gives you much more pleasure than magazine articles are for the moment. Even if they are live on social media or on online, they're essentially to make a point very quickly. Why historians should stay away from policy making? I mean, historians are not advisors. I mean, economists can advise. That's a more technical profession. On monetary policy, on labor policy, economists may want to give advice. Sociologists who work on health or education may have some useful inputs to offer in policy making, but historians shouldn't. I mean, I think I don't know whether the article you referred to was one in which I referred to historians advising George Bush to go to war in Iraq. Look what happened. And two really good historians. I mean, Neil Ferguson and John Gaddis of Yale University. I mean, Neil Ferguson of Harvard and John Gaddis of not only one, they're first-rate historians. I mean, the historical work is top class. And they told him, you'll go to Iraq, you'll be welcomed with flowers. Now, what does that tell you? I mean, it tells you that the things historians should, they should be modest about what they can do and what they can't do. By the way, one other thing I should say about this, because just a way of point of the whole question of writers, politicians, how to stay objective. I often get calls from politicians, wanting to meet. Now, I have one lesson. Two things I do, not just from politicians. I even get calls sometimes from big business people, because something I write, they think it's unfair, they want to talk. Or politicians, of course, usually they think I'm going to ghostwrite their memoir or whatever. Now, I have a lesson. I live in Bangalore. One of the luckiest things is that I live in Bangalore. I talked about lucky accidents. One of the luckiest things is that you live in Bangalore. If you're a writer writing on controversial political or social subjects, the farther away from Delhi, the better you are. So, and it's not only for writers, it's for scientists too. Just to elaborate on this, I'll come back to the point I wanted to make. Some years ago, I gave a talk, at the National Chemical Laboratory in Pune. So this was 2008 was their 60th anniversary. So they called me to give a lecture. They wanted to call people from the humanities. They called me. And when I went, I told the director, I went because the director did not know that my uncle was the founder director. He called me because of my academic work. I went and gave a talk, and he showed me the research they were doing, and I met the scientists, and I saw how excited they were. So I congratulated him. I said, Dr. Sivaraman, by the way, I'm delighted by how well your institute is doing, and I should tell you that I'm so-and-so's nephew, and my uncle would have been delighted at the quality of what they're doing. So he said, Dr. Guha, please don't praise me. It's not me. It's simply a function of the fact that how far we are from Delhi. We are doing good work in science because we are 1,200 miles from Delhi. But the Indian Institute of Science is doing even better work because it is 2,000 miles from Delhi. In Bangalore. So anyway, so to return to that question. So I think you have independence because you're not in that bubble of Delhi, to retain your autonomy, your independence, vanity, someone calls you. So I have a lesson. If any politician wants to meet me, I get calls from important people. Come to Bangalore and meet me. I go to Delhi on research. I only meet either friends, old friends, or scholars. I come to Bangalore and meet me. And in Bangalore, if you want, come to my house or to Koshi's to meet me. I won't go to your house, and I won't go to a party office. That's a kind of, because, the reason the Harvard and Yale professors advised George Bush is that writers are notoriously susceptible to flattery. If a president calls you into the Oval Office, or if Manmohan Singh or Narendra Modi calls you to Racecourse Road and says, Guha ji, आपने बहुत अच्छा लेख लिखा, हमको बताइए ये देश कैसा चला है? You'll be so flattered, wow. But actually, it's just, so I think that's very important. It's a seduction, and everyone is exempt from that. No one is exempt from that. So I'm again very lucky that I live in Bangalore, which I'm far away from these kinds of seductions. It'd be much harder if you're in Delhi. Yeah.
Now there's slightly more uncategorized.
Yeah.
Vasundhara, Vinita, Divya, Mama, Revati.
So you had written an article back in 2000 in which you had called Arundhati Roy as the Arun Shourie of the left.
Yeah.
In that article, you are quite critical about the involvement of celebrities in social movements. But don't you think that celebrity participation would call more attention to the issue at hand, especially from the youth?
So I read your article, Good Men, Better Husbands, from your Good Men, Better Husbands, from your website.
Okay.
And you had mentioned.
Go on.
So you had mentioned the role of women in a man's life, and you had quoted a person in that. And did the article come from your personal life, or you simply wanted to write about the role of women in man's life?
Right. Yeah, that's thanks so much. Okay. Yeah, thanks.
The Hindu religion is not defined yet. The Hindu religion is not defined yet. As a historian, have you ever made an attempt to define the Hindu religion?
Define.
Yeah.
Define. Define.
My question is, if partition of India was avoided in 1947, is there any chances that it would have been decided to part India in later few years, and why?
If partition had been avoided?
Is there any chances that it would have been decided to part India in later few years, and why?
Yeah. The last, okay. Yeah. Mike.
Yeah, my question is based on your quality. So I have two questions. We've now come 69 years after independence. You've written that there is the iron triangle, machinery which is set in place to monopolize the resources of our country, and that the real exploitation of nature is only by a small minority of the forward caste and the rich omnivores. So how is it that this machinery was set in place in the formative years, and was it one man's idea, or was it a group of people who sat down and meticulously planned it this way, to continue in the same sort of oppression and
I'm not a scholar of Hinduism. I'm a scholar of how Hindu idioms and symbols are used and misused in politics. Hinduism per se, either its history or its theology, I have no idea. On partition, I wrote two essays in the Hindustan Times recently explaining why avoiding partition may not have solved our problem. So I urge you to look at them. On the article I wrote, Good Men, Better Husbands, which was about, I was slightly puzzled because it was about Virginia Woolf and Leonard Woolf, and working drawn on my personal experience. When I'm married, I have two children, a son and a daughter. When my son was born, I said to myself, I hope I am half as good a father to my son as my father was to me. That's what I said. But I should have also have said, I hope I am twice as good a husband as my father was. So I think patriarchy is so deeply encoded among Indian men that it takes a long time to unwind. My wife and my daughter have tried largely, I would say wholly unsuccessfully, to rid me of my patriarchal tendencies and beliefs. And I'm learning all the time. I think that's, so that article, which is about this great man called Leonard Woolf, who enabled Virginia Woolf's work and did some extraordinary work in his own right. When I wrote it, I did not think it was an influence of my personal experience. It's a tribute to Leonard Woolf, but somewhere here and there, yes. This is something that my daughter and is continuously educating me. I read a very interesting book recently, which was it's called more so I would say than even than Christianity. And I think this is something we have to continuously be aware of. On the ecological question, that book, Ecology and Equity, was written almost 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago. And things have changed. I mean, now, some of the stuff I've written later, I mean, I don't know, essay about how much should a person consume. Because now, everyone wants to be an omnivore. That's really the dilemma of modern society, is everyone wants to be an omnivore. Is that possible? Is that conceptually or ecologically possible? And the desire for everyone to be an omnivore, what the devastation will be? There are all complex questions that we have to grapple with. Lastly, about, whatever else I knew, one question would come out of the video. Now, there were two parts of the question. One was, you mentioned the title, the Arun Shourie of the left. And the second part was, is celebrity endorsement good or bad? There can be two opinions on that. But I personally still think it is bad. And I myself do not do celebrity endorsement. When I wrote that essay, I was not a celebrity. Today, I may not be a celebrity, but I'm often called upon to endorse XYZ cause, and I don't. Even a really good cause. I mean, for example, 2 or 3 weeks ago, my good and esteemed friend Yogendra Yadav, whom I admire hugely, as a scholar and activist, wrote to me and said that they are taking out a march to the drought-affected areas of the peninsula, Karnataka, Maharashtra. Terrible drought in many parts of peninsula India, and the politicians and no one is talking about it. And he said, well, I join you for a couple of days. And I thought about it, and I said, no, because this would be celebrity endorsement. I'm not a sociologist of agriculture. I don't know enough about it. But Ram Guha, famous historian, joining march is news. But how the hell? The things that I care passionately about freedom of expression. There are 2 or 3 subjects which I've studied seriously. One is ecological questions, and the other is the history of Adivasis in India. And on those questions, if there is an issue on which I can speak of, if there's a rally defending Adivasi rights, and I was, for example, a petitioner in the Supreme Court on against Salwa Judum in Dantewada, right? So that's something I feel I know something about. So I feel personally, for me, in my view, for me at least, that's my decision. If other celebrities want to endorse, that's up to them. But I would like to say something about that, the title of that article. When I wrote that article, it's now 15 years ago, many of my close friends, even though they agreed with some of my arguments, were very upset by my title. Why did you call Arundhati Roy the Arun Shourie of the left? Arun Shourie is the demon of the right. He defends Hindutva, he's a BJP MP. How could you compare? That was unfair. Now, I would say today, I stand completely vindicated. Because in 1996, Arun Shourie wrote a long book attacking Ambedkar, long on abuse and short on scholarship. And 15 years later, Arundhati Roy has written a long book attacking Gandhi, long on abuse and short on scholarship. So she certainly is the Arun Shourie of the left. At least, even if nothing else in my article was right, my title is totally vindicated.
Just one request, if the questions could come only from students and not from any faculty or staff member, we appreciate that. So SV, if you would.
Number 1. Number 2, regarding Indira Gandhi,
my question is regarding the Uniform Civil Code. In India after Gandhi, you talk about how the Uniform Civil Code was discussed in post-independent India, and Nehru was more or less supportive of it, but because of the political conditions at that point of time, he wanted to delay it. So what do you think, if Nehru was alive now, what would have been his take on Uniform Civil Code now, and personally, what do you think of it?
My question is, tell us about the Gandhi's modern day critic
And my second question is, does esteem for Gandhi depend on the continued success of Indian democratic experiment? Yeah, modern day critic of Gandhi.
So you just mentioned that if you'd want a humane, dignified, and tolerant lifestyle, you'd rather go to some, other country. So maybe in this context, I'd want to know the perspective, your perspective, on the actions of the right-wing actors, considering that the elections are coming up with the Dadri lynchings and ban on beef and attacks, and of course, ban on a lot of other things. So, you're continuously observing that the comments which are coming from people, for example, Sadhvi Niranjan Joshi, etc., who are known for communal, activism, and even in their speech, it's the same. So, is it a conscious decision of, leading towards polarization? And, but then aren't they fearing that, questions like this would be asked and answers which I'm expecting that you're going to give? So, don't we matter here? And the ones who matter, that's the voters there. So, will they be affected by, this entire attempt of polarization, which is very clear?
It seems to be a deliberate strategy. Again, this is something I've argued in the past. And if you look at democratic elections, people campaigning for democratic elections, there are two broad ways in which politicians campaign. They use the rhetoric of hope or the rhetoric of fear. The rhetoric of hope is roti, kapda, makan, bijli, sadak, pani, rozgar. And the rhetoric of fear is the Yadavs will exploit you, or the Brahmins will exploit you, or the Muslims will take over this country. All over the world, it happens. So these are the two rhetorics, right? And what's happening is clear that the BJP is moving, it's trying to play both. It played one in Gujarat, the rhetoric of fear, then it played the rhetoric of hope in the general election. Now it's again gone back to kind of a mixture. So it is worrying, which is why I think about Amit Shah. I think Amit Shah is someone who we should much more carefully probe, because he, in many ways, is the orchestrator of this planning also. Now the other question is Nehru and China, in his time, what was right, what was wrong. Debate, you see, I've written a long essay on this in my book, Patriots and Partisans, a 40-page essay on India and China. It's a very complex issue. These are two great civilizations. Coming out of colonialism, trying to industrialize, modernize, and clashing at the border. And some kind of conflict would have happened, whoever had been in power. Would have been different, we can't say. Nehru understood this. He also says that there's going to be a conflict. I think on Tibet, our role has been totally honorable. Totally honorable. I think the fact that Tibetan culture survives today because of... Tibetan culture survives today because of India. Richard Gere said, the Tibetans have no protector. That's how he thinks. It's not true. The Indians protected him long before this Hollywood actor woke up. And I feel strongly about it. I've come from Dehradun, I grew up with Tibetans. Nehru did absolutely the right thing. Giving the Dalai Lama refuge was a great and honorable thing to do. Could he have gone to war over it? Probably not. But the Chinese were wild. What enraged the Chinese that we gave Dalai Lama refuge. The conflict was inevitable because there is a genuine debate. It's not as if India's position on the border is foolproof. Our position is stronger in the western sector, it's weak on the eastern sector. And Nehru wanted to make a border deal in 1960, but the opposition did not let him. And because it was a democracy and people said not 1 inch of our motherland will go, there was otherwise the deal could have been stuck even then. The Chinese said, essentially they said, wink at our transgressions in the western sector and we'll wink at your transactions in the eastern sector. Our case on Arunachal Pradesh is not foolproof. Let me tell you as a historian. It's not foolproof. Because Tawang was paying tribute to Lhasa. And if Lhasa is now part of China, that means Tawang was paying tribute to Lhasa. It's a very complicated question. And the real mistake Nehru made with regard to China was the issue of Krishnamurti. Where he gave the defense portfolio to a person who did not, really strengthen our army and made it ready. But some kind of conflict with China would have probably have taken place. Because Mao is now well known from documents that have been released that Mao was under pressure in China because of the failure of the Great Leap Forward, and it was to re-establish his, and Russia and America were diverted by the Cuban Missile Crisis, and it was to re-establish his authority within the Communist Party that he attacked India. So there are lots of complex issues involved. Nehru made mistakes, but by no means are they the ones of you talk about. We could not have gone to war with China about Tibet, but we could have given the Dalai Lama and the Tibetans refuge and a dignified place to live. On the unified, the Uniform Civil Code, my position is, I'd rather call it a gender-sensitive common civil code. That's what I'd like to call it, because uniform has a kind of negative connotations. I'm for it. I think that we should have a commission of jurists who take the best and the most progressive from a gender point of view, most progressive elements in different laws, and provide every Indian man and woman the same rights, right? In whatever ways, about property, marriage, divorce, and so on and so forth. I think Rajiv Gandhi did his party and his country a great disservice when he could, with 400 people in parliament in the 1980s, have brought it about. And I think liberals and feminists should look at the issue on first principles. They oppose it because the BJP supports it, but the BJP does not really support it. If they did, they'd have brought it into parliament. They don't want to bring it into parliament. They raise it merely to spite Muslims. That's the only reason that it is. But the BJP supporting it is not a reason for us simply to oppose it, nature. Gandhi, his critics, I mean, it's very, of course Gandhi has critics, from the left and from the right, and I think it's good, it's healthy, and the debate will continue on Gandhi and his legacies, and Gandhi always welcomed criticism. The greatness of Gandhi was that if you look at his journal, Young India, which then became Harijan, he would often reproduce his criticisms, the critics' arguments in his magazine, and then either answer them, refute them, concede them, refine his views, and that was why he was such an extraordinary leader. I mean, political leaders all over the world are secret. They believe in monologue. I mean, if Narendra Modi, it will never happen, but just imagine Narendra Modi starting Man Ki Baat with 5 minutes of criticism of his last Man Ki Baat. Just think, and that's what Gandhi would do. I mean, if you look at Harijan, he would reproduce 3 or 4 paragraphs of very sharp criticism. A Muslim friend has written to me, a woman friend of South India has written to me, saying your arguments are all wrong, X, Y, Z, and so on. So I think that's part of Gandhi's greatness, that he welcomed and allowed criticism. And also because he did so many things, and he touched so many spheres. I mean, he was a freedom fighter, a social reformer, an institution builder. He wrote about Khadi, about education, about non-violence, about religion, about caste, about gender. That there was much to see, much to criticize. That's part of, for me, I mean, I'm now working on a biography of Gandhi. Part of the interest and excitement is the range of debates he had, and the range of, interesting people who argued with him, and he argued that.
While writing history, but there are voices of people from bottom of the pyramid who are not really in the mainstream media or not in the state archives. So how do you bring those voices to about an event while writing history?
Why, according to you, is Indian government not publishing the secret files of Bose? And do you think Jawaharlal Nehru had something to do with it?
Sir, how do you define secular in this age? And do you see secularism as widening religious divides or narrowing them?
So why that is happening? Ki one section is trying to see them ki they are the more cooperative than others. Why the cooperation of others are not highlighted? Because it's a. I want to ask that why the. Yeah, why the cooperation of each and every section society of the not highlighted? That's my question. Why they are neglected?
Sir, what went wrong from India vis-a-vis her neighbor? Because of that, elements from neighbor are propagating anti-India nationalism. My question is in the context of recent years' political turmoil in Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Pakistan. Thank you.
To start with, how does a historian incorporate many different voices, not just the voice of the elite? Well, you use a wider range of sources. You don't just deal with government documents. You look at sources in different languages. You look at newspapers, you look at court records, you look at memoirs. And you can't completely capture the subaltern voices. It is true that written documents tend to be dominated by elite voices, but that's not completely true. You know, many years ago, the Italian historian Carlo Ginzburg wrote a famous book called The Cheese and the Worms, which is based on, the Inquisition and how the voices of an ordinary miller were captured. So often you can, to the extent possible. History is always an approximation to the truth. It's not the perfect truth. History is always, the work of a historian is always an interim verdict. Some other historian will come and write a more nuanced, more complicated book, superseding yours. It's an ongoing debate and dialogue. But you can, by using a wider range of sources in different languages, moving beyond the state archive, to some extent incorporate voices of peasants, tribals, women, Dalits, and so on. The Bose files, I don't really know why they were suppressed. I don't know what they will reveal. I don't know who will come out badly. I can't really say. I mean, we're all waiting. So I must say I find the obsession with Bose a little unhealthy. I mean, it's as if we are waiting for this magic figure to come and rescue us. I think they are very, but of course they must come out. By the way, there's a debate in the Bose family as well. Narendra Modi called it one part of the Bose family. The last thing I have to say about Bose is that Bose would have detested the BJP. Everything that he has said on record was totally against Hindu fundamentalism. Bose also detested Vallabhbhai Patel and vice versa. So Narendra Modi is playing some very cynical politics. He's trying to, he's playing on the ignorance of his supporters by saying Patel and Bose are on our side. But Patel and Bose were not on the same side. I mean, because Patel was instrumental in kicking Bose out of the Congress party. So you make up your mind, either have Patel or have Bose. You can't have both. So that's a important mistake. This goes back to the question about the freedom movement and who protests freedom and who claims credit. The Congress party was the major player in the national movement, but it was not the only player. Because it came to power in 1947, it may have exaggerated its role. Afterwards, one family took over the Congress party, so that family's role became exaggerated. And some of this is good, despite some of the eccentricities of the way in which Narendra Modi invokes Bose and Patel. It's good that other voices are coming up, because otherwise it was all Nehru, Indira, and Rajiv, and the contributions of many other people were ignored. The question of secularism, I usually don't use secular because of the various ways it has been compromised and polluted. I use the word plural. I'm a plural. I believe in diversity and tolerance and pluralism. I think I'm also a liberal. And as a liberal, I believe in a common civil code for all citizens. Because I think every citizen must have the same rights. And I think family laws, as the case of a Christian divorce shows, it will militate against this. We have to. So I think some of the BJP's criticism is correct. That secularism has been used in the past to appease not only minorities, not appease minorities, but appease the reactionary sections of the minorities. I think Sonia Gandhi calling on the Shahi Imam of Jama Masjid and asking for votes is a profoundly anti-secular act. So I try to use the word, but I do believe that religious and linguistic diversity and tolerance are crucial to the sustenance of Indian democracy. So that's how I would like to phrase it. Well, India and its neighbors, as the person who asked the question also used the word anti-India. I think there's a difference between Pakistan and China on the one side, and Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka on the other. With Pakistan and China, we have major and complex difficulties. With Pakistan, there's the unresolved question of Kashmir. It goes back 65 years. There is the sponsoring of terrorism from Pakistan. It goes back about 20 years. So they are real and complex issues. With China, there is a long-standing border dispute. There is a war of 1962, which we still haven't got over. But with regard to the smaller neighbors, India has behaved badly. India has been a big brother to Bangladesh, Nepal, and Sri Lanka. We are mistrusted because we have treated them badly. P.P. Koirala, who was a great Nepali Democrat, and a very close friend of Jayaprakash Narayan and Lohiya and Gandhi, the first person to bring about democracy in Nepal through a long non-violent struggle, modeled it on India. He called his party the Nepal Indian Congress. He said, no, we could not find a greater friend of India in Nepal than P.P. Koirala. And he said, the Indian High Commissioner, the Indian Ambassador in Nepal behaves as if Nepal is a village and he is the head of the village panchayat. You know, the arrogance of the Indian Ambassador in Nepal is that of an imperial power. We have, often mistreated them, interfered in their politics. When we don't like, we are angry with Nepal, we cut off supplies of kerosene. They're a landlocked nation. This is not how you treat your smaller neighbors. We have no historic ties with Nepal, yet we squandered that. With Bangladesh, we had them get freedom, and yet they don't like us. Why? Because we haven't given them justice on the question of the distribution of the Ganges waters. In Sri Lanka, we fomented the Tamil civil war, and then we went and intervened and made it worse. So, if you look at the record of India versus China and Pakistan, you can say China has wronged us and we have wronged China. With regard to Pakistan, Pakistan has wronged us. Maybe to some extent we have wronged Pakistan. Maybe Pakistan is more to blame in the question of India and Pakistan. But with regard to our smaller neighbors, I think the proof of a mature democracy is how it treats a large, powerful, mature democracy is how it treats its smaller neighbors. And that test India has failed. Just as other countries have failed in the past, America has failed. America has always tried to bully countries in Latin America. And there was a 19th century president of Mexico called Porfirio Diaz. And he once said, poor Mexico, so far from God, so close to the United States of America. And many Nepali friends of mine would say, poor Nepal, so far from Vishnu, so close to the Republic of India. So on this question, there is a difference. Pakistan and China, yes, there are complex disagreements and differences where we may have to take a tough line. With regard to Nepal, Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, we have come across as overbearing bullies, and it's time that changed. A great example is the Nepal earthquake. Why did Narendra Modi have to boast that the Nepali Prime Minister got to know the earthquake because of his tweet? He boasted this. And the kind of jingoism of the TV channels, India is doing this, India is doing that, it got us so much feeling. If you want to help your neighbor, help them quietly. And does Narendra Modi have to boast about this? What do you think of the sensitivity of the Nepali? I mean, it's like an upper caste person patronizing the Dalit. I allowed him to come into my kitchen. We have a long history of this, so you really have to, and this is across all governments, it's not just the BJP, the Congress is also inadequate towards these people, So I think we have, if you want goodwill of Nepal, Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, we have to change, more than they have to.
रीराइटिंग द हिस्ट्री, इस इशू को आप कितना चिंताजनक मानते हो?
As you said that you are working on the biography of Gandhi, what do you think about his views on democracy? No, we have some letters, some readings on it. Yeah, Uday Mehta. Yeah.
So we talk about social equality and political equality. So given the present political scenario in the country, how do you think these two would interplay. Like, do you think political equality could be a way of, could be a contributory factor to promote social equality, or is it worsening the inequality in the country?
Okay. Good morning, sir. My question is this: is there anything like ideology exist in Indian political parties? Like, let's take an example of Samajwadi Party. There is no socialism in it. Let's take example of Bahujan Samaj Party. Majorly, it gives tickets to upper caste. And CPM is no longer a communist party. So, is there anything like ideology exist? That's my question, sir.
That's a very important question. I mean, exactly.
My question is that some historians misinterpreted history in their ideological manner. As we learners, how we can find which is more authentic works and books of history for understanding about real history?
Good morning, sir. You wrote about the art of wicket keeping, Uttak Baitak, for school magazine. Why did you wrote only? You explain in that you explained about briefly wicket keeping. Do you like wicket keeping? Wicket keeping. Wicket.
And I think the way to judge is, of course, the depth. I mean, scholars know who uses more. It's ongoing dialogue. The important thing is कि तो इतिहास है तो सरकार के माध्यम से नहीं लिखी जाती. जो इतिहासकार सरकार के माध्यम से लिखता है या किसी नेता के माध्यम से लिखता है, उसको उस पर कोई भरोसा मत रखिए. So they have to be independent and they have to keep that going. And based on the depth of the research and the plausibility of their argument, you can make up your mind, and then you must read as widely as possible. You know, read many books on the same topic, and then you make up your mind. On the question of the emergency, I mean, it's hard to read. India after Gandhi has 2-3 chapters on it, so do read it. I mean, there's one called The Rivals, and the one after that. So the 20 it's about JP and Indira and then the emergency itself. And it's a very interesting, complex question. The history is still being written. I mean, my book was written 30 years later, better and more nuanced books come out. And it was, I argue in my book that both JP and Indira Gandhi contributed to the emergency. Indira Gandhi more than JP, of course, because JP from below, by undermining institutional constitutional authority, by saying the police should revolt and the government should resign, rather than
disruptions in parliament. But Indira Gandhi, of course, had no business bringing about an emergency and suspending civil liberties. She did it to protect her own seat. And of course, she finally called it off. The interesting thing about why she called it off is that she never consulted Sanjay Gandhi. That's the only decision in the emergency that
Sanjay Gandhi was not consulted. So it's a fascinating story, which we still, we're still trying to understand it. And I think some importance must also be paid, as I have again done in India after Gandhi, to the work done by the Janata Party, particularly Morarji Desai and his law minister Padma Bhushan, in undoing the legal excesses of the emergency. All the amendments were unamended, so that it's now far more difficult to undertake an emergency because of the work done by Morarji Desai and Padma Bhushan. On the question of ideologies and political parties, sadly you're right. I mean, it's hard to think of a political party that has an ideology. You know, the Aam Aadmi Party, many people had hope in, but it seems to be just a Kejriwal-centric party. You know, the way flip-flops of Narendra Modi in the last 2 years have already described. Nitish Kumar, you know, certainly is a person driven by belief and ideology and a deep commitment to the welfare of the Biharis. But then why did he align with Lalu Yadav? You know, would he have been better off just going on his own? You know, at least his integrity would have stayed intact. His answer would be, that way I have no chance. Politics is about the art of compromise and minimizing damage. But it is disheartening, the loss of belief in consistent policies of any particular party. It is certainly that's worrying. Gandhi and democracy is a very large question. If you mean Gandhi and electoral democracy, if you mean Gandhi, it's like this. Gandhi and debate and dialogue I've already talked about. Another very important way in which, if you want to talk about Gandhi and democracy, you talk about the question of non-violence. You know, and Gandhi's belief that all disagreements must be settled non-violently. So that's at least a deep democratic principle. Gandhi believed in, eliminating gender and caste hierarchies. That's again a question of, that's a democratic instinct in him. He did not really believe in electoral democracy. And in Swaraj, he actually called the House of Commons prostitutes. He actually said that, it was 1909. But eventually, when the Constituent Assembly was being framed, he didn't interfere. He let Ambedkar and Nehru do what they did. I think what Gandhi would have wanted was far more vigorous local councils. I think the 73rd and 74th Amendment, and giving teeth to them, which has not happened. So that one of the interesting shifts in Indian democracy has been a transfer of power from the center to the states. That has happened through democratic composition. But the next phase, from the states to the towns, the municipalities, the villages, is something which the 73rd and 74th Amendment envisaged, but it did not really happen. But he had problems with electoral democracy, but I think he was wisely overruled by Nehru and Ambedkar. I'm glad Gandhi does not have to be always followed, and I'm glad that Nehru and Ambedkar overruled him on that. Because as Winston Churchill famously said, parliamentary democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others. Thank you for that question on wicket keeping. Because I talked about how I started off as a cricketer. My father was also part of the reason I love cricket. When he was a boy of 16 or 17, watched a cricket match in Bombay. It was, I think, Ranji Trophy champions was the rest of India. Lala Amarnath was the captain of the rest of India. And in that match, he batted, bowled, captained, and kept wickets. And that was my father's dream. What a great all-rounder. My father would keep wickets also. He could bowl and bat. I could bowl quite well. I was not much of a batsman. I was hopeless as a wicketkeeper. I tried because of what my father had told me about Lala Amarnath. I tried. And sometimes in a college match, more than once, what would happen is, we are very easily, 9 wickets are down. So at the key interval, 9 wickets are down. So I told the college wicketkeeper, let me keep wickets. And the next 3 balls went through my legs, basically. So wicketkeeping is a most difficult art. I mean, it's like, one of my favorite cricketers is actually Syed Kirmani. He was a fabulous keeper. And one of the modern cricketers I like best, I don't know, is actually the Zimbabwe wicketkeeper Taitende Taibu, who left cricket to become a priest. And if he's half as good a priest as he was a wicketkeeper, he would have probably converted 10 million people by now, or 100 million people. I don't know, but wonderful keeper. You have to be short, wonderful movements, fabulous keeping up. So it's an art. I mean, the thing about cricket, many parts of cricket are arts. And as someone who tried to keep wickets and failed, I mean, I know how difficult it is. And how underappreciated. How underappreciated it is. I mean, I must say that in the book you're quoting from, the chapter on wicket keeping, there's a story I made up. So allow me to tell that story. I made it up. In a history book, I won't make up things. But in my cricket writing, I make up. The story is like this. I talk about Kirmani, and I say he was keeping to Chandrasekhar, the most difficult wicketkeeper, even most difficult leg spinner, much more difficult than Vaughan and Kumble. And there's a match, a kind of a warm-up match in Australia, and Kirmani is keeping to Chandrasekhar. And in my book, I did it to 77, 78. And the way I tell the story in my book is Chandrasekhar bowls down the leg side, the batsman tries to glance him, overbalances him, and Kirmani stumps him. And as he says, how's that? And turns to the umpire says, wonderful. Now, that's the story in that book, and it's made up. It actually happened not in 1978, but in 1878, and it was a story about an Australian wicketkeeper called Blacker, who was the first great wicketkeeper. And I transposed it to Kirmani, because Kirmani was my favorite wicketkeeper. And I said, I promise you I won't, none of what I write in my history books is made up like that. But I'm glad you asked that question of wicketkeeping, because Dhoni is basically a long stop. He's not a wicketkeeper. He's a great batsman, great one-day batsman, but he's a long stop. I mean, the last good Indian wicketkeeper we had was Nayan Mongia.
And when I saw Mongia came to Kumle, I remembered, Kirmani and Chandrasekhar. I mean, Gilchrist was a fantastic keeper. Alan Knott. I mean, so I think it's one of the great underappreciated arts in cricket is that of a keeper. Also, those of you who follow baseball, the catcher is actually similar. It's very arduous. It's also Uttak Batak. It's a hell of a lot. It's great stress. And, because I was so bad at it. So if you're really bad at something you try to do, you tend to admire those people who are good at it that much more. So Kirmani comes in the room, I still stand up. Because just to salute him, just a master, just fabulous as a keeper. One last story about Kirmani, I must tell you. I was watching a match, and this was in I think 2001. Kirmani retired about 15 years before that. It was the Chinnaswamy Stadium. It was India versus England one-day match. And Kiran More missed a leg side catch. It was a tough catch. And there was a guy sitting next to me in the stand. The bloody fool, and he uttered some abuse in Kannada and then in English, and he said, Kirmani would never have dropped that. He's addressing More from a million miles away. He said, Kirmani would never have dropped that. Then he said, bring him back even today and he will keep better than you. So that's the kind of memory of great keepers I have. Kirmani was right at the top.
You didn't answer the question on political and social equality.
Yeah, sorry. That is slightly less important than wicket-keeping. But only slightly less important. Only slightly less important. I think we have I think this goes back to Ambedkar. Ambedkar, in his famous last speech to the Constituent Assembly, which is accepted in Makers of What, he talks about this. Right? We do have one person, one vote. But do we have one person, one value? It's a long and arduous struggle. I mean, if you look at India, there are four groups, broadly, that are historically discriminated against. And these are Dalits, Adivasis, women, and minorities. I would say Muslims, not minorities, because I think Christians and Buddhists and Sikhs and Parsis and Jains are not in the same category as Muslims. So there are these four groups, and we all have one person, one vote. I've explained how Dalits and Adivasis, go and vote. But do they have one person, one value? It's an ongoing struggle. I think the thing in India is that it's a battle between a contemporary commitment to constitutional equality on all counts versus historical and sociological residues going back centuries, which embed these kinds of inequalities with Dalits and with women. With regard to Adivasis and Muslims, the social inequalities are new. With Muslims, they're because of partition and the fact that they are seen as somehow problematic and as having betrayed India. With Adivasis, it's to do with the fact that economic growth benefits many sections, but not the Adivasis, because of the fact that they happen to inhabit mining resources, forest resources, water resources that are deeply, deeply exploited. So, I think that the question that Ambedkar raised, he said one man, one vote. Today he would say one person, one vote. We have one person, one vote. Do we have one person, one value? And I think with these four groups, Dalits, women, Adivasis, and Muslims, it's a question that should concern all of us. And in different ways, we should find ways of reducing the gap between one person, one vote, and the fact that we don't have one person, one vote.
At the time of independence, according to your, this question is related to three persons, Nehru, Gandhi, and Ambedkar. So at the time of independence, according to your view, sir, are they supported Dalits and these low caste peoples or minorities? Are they really supported, or are they supported to build up their power themselves? When the Ambedkar came from the from other countries to India, so before that, Nehru and Gandhi, they never thought about the low caste people. So after, at the time of independence only, they started thinking about the low caste people to develop themselves. So are they really supported, or they supported to build up their power? So, thank you, sir.
We started with the Balu Palolkar and
again came to the cricket. So my question is that, hello. So we started with the Balu Palwankar and Ambedkar, even though that time the Dalit who took place in the cricket team also. But nowadays we are listening this one rethinking reservation. Okay, how this also the saffronization of institutions. These are the both like RSS agendas you can select. So how the Dalit and the marginalized people can survive in this kind of ideologies in this future?
In India recently, we've seen a rise in religious politics. So do you think that there's an inherent flaw in religion which causes violence? Or is it that when religion is mixed with politics is where the violence and all that is caused? And I would like to know your reasons for whatever your opinion is.
So my question is something similar to what our senior asked. So sir, while you were speaking today, you said that the backward castes are not as oppressed now as they were during the colonial period. So do you think that still caste reservation should prevail in our society?
Suggestions you want to give for nowadays youth about politics? Suggestions you want to give for nowadays youth about politics?
I don't look to the future. I don't give advice. And whatever advice I've given my daughter and son has been mostly disregarded. But I'm just joking. I think young people must make their own lives, their own mistakes. You must read, I would say, learn languages, read widely, travel. And if possible, develop an interest in music or art. Because that will sustain you the whole life. That's all. I mean, I can't say join party A, party B, none of that. I think broadly, travel, learn languages, read widely, all across. Read fiction, non-fiction, poetry, left wing, right wing, Dalit writers, caste writers, foreign writers. Beyond that, I don't like young people must make their own lives, their own mistakes. The way I do. The question of, at the club, the question of, Dalits, saffronization, and reservation. As I said in my answer to the question about political and social equality, these are unfolding questions. The fact that backward castes are less exploited now does not mean that they are not exploited. They are not equal citizens. I deliberately did not mention OBCs in my list of 4 people who are exploited, deeply exploited. I said Dalits, tribals, Muslims, and women. And I think OBCs, I was never a wholehearted supporter of the Mandal Commission report. I think affirmative action for Dalits and tribals has a much more robust legal and moral case than affirmative action for OBCs. In fact, affirmative action for OBCs has led to growing conflict between OBCs and Dalits all across India. So these are questions about, and unfortunately the debate on reservation has become pro or against. It should be much more nuanced. Which groups, how do you target them, how do you ensure it's distributed widely, and what should be the quantum? I'm glad the Supreme Court restricted it to 50. In my view, 35 would have been even better than 50. And someone who's written very well about this is the sociologist Andre Bete, who wrote an essay, I hope it's in your reading list, it should be. Please read an essay of his. This was published in EPW in 1990 or 91, immediately after the Mandal Commission report came. It's called Distributive Justice and Social Action. I beg your pardon. Distributive Justice and Institutional Well-being. Andre Bete, Distributive Justice and Institutional Well-being, and it shows the difference between reservation for Dalits on the one side and reservation for OBCs on the other, the different compulsions and motivations. So I think it's a complex issue, but I feel India still needs reservation for Dalits and Adivasis. Maybe better administered, maybe with a creamy layer taken out, maybe with MPs and MLAs and classmen, government officers exempt. But I think I'm not equally in favor of reservation for OBCs. Reservation for women in parliament may be a good idea. And I'm sorry Sonia Gandhi backed out and didn't push it. So I think we are still at a stage of our development as a democracy where deep inequalities persist,
We need certain forms of affirmative action, but certainly we can do them better in a more focused way, and that's something which legal experts and sociologists should seriously debate and talk about. Just a last question about Nehru, Gandhi, and Ambedkar, and to wind up, how much were they driven by personal ambition, and how much were they driven by shall we say, social or moral concern? How much was because they deeply felt about these issues, and how much was because they felt talking about women or Muslims or Dalits would make them more successful in politics? Now, every politician is a mixture of conviction and ambition. Every politician. A mixture. Maybe some are 100-0, but it's rare. 100 ambition, 0 conviction is possible. Maybe Hitler was 100 ambition, 0 conviction. Even Lalu Yadav is at least 5% conviction. He did suffer as someone who came. Today he is very rich and very prosperous, but he did come from an OBC background. He must have suffered upper caste oppression at some stage. Mayawati certainly suffered. Mayawati, read the stories of her growing up, she certainly suffered. So every politician, barring Hitler, is a mixture of ambition and conviction. No politician is wholly conviction, not even Gandhi. Gandhi wanted to be a great leader. So every politician is a mixture. But in the case of Gandhi, Nehru, and Ambedkar, I think their conviction was at least 50%, if not more. They were as driven by conviction as by personal ambition. You could say Ambedkar was less ambitious than Nehru, maybe. Gandhi was less ambitious, but they were all by a mixture. So I think that's the thing you must remember. They were moral and social concern was also part of their politics, and an important part of their politics, at least 50%. Maybe more than 50%, but at least 50%. So I think that's the benefit of the doubt we should give them. V.S. Naipaul once said, India was very lucky to have Gandhi, Nehru, and Tagore born in the same century. I'm sorry he did not add Ambedkar. We were very lucky to have Gandhi, Nehru, Ambedkar, and Tagore in this. They were all extraordinary people, and they were driven by deep concern and compassion for this country, for the people who suffered, and for humanity as a whole. So I think to accuse Gandhi of being driven only by ambition, or Nehru or Ambedkar, everyone has made this accusation. Arun Shourie made the accusation that Ambedkar was driven only by ambition. Arundhati Roy makes the accusation that Gandhi was driven mostly by ambition. Many people say Nehru only wanted to retain power. But this is simply untrue. Nehru, Ambedkar, and Gandhi were conviction politicians. They were truly great leaders and Indians, but of course they were ambitious. They wanted to be in a position where they could enact their views and encode it into policy. So that's the first thing I'd like to say. At least 50% conviction. Maybe 60, 70%, we don't know, but don't disparage them and say they were simply creatures of. We should not go into fall into the trap of what ideologues do and disparage them and see them as simply seeking power. Now, having said this, what did they do? And this is actually an interesting framework in which you maybe allow me to end. Gandhi and Ambedkar as I've argued in many of my writings, worked together in undermining the ideological basis of the caste system. Gandhi from above and Ambedkar from below. Though it seemed that they were rivals and opponents, actually they were engaged in a task of emancipating the Dalits from different points of view. So the question of caste inequality was addressed by Gandhi and Ambedkar very directly. And Nehru did not really care about it. Nehru did not understand the complexity of the caste system for a variety of reasons, and he was influenced by Marxism, so class mattered and not caste. That's with regard to caste. With regard to Muslims, Nehru, or the rights of minorities, Nehru and Gandhi worked together. Gandhi before independence and Nehru after independence. The reason we did not become a Hindu Pakistan is because of the combined efforts of people like Gandhi and Nehru. So that Gandhi and Ambedkar attacked the question of caste inequality. Gandhi and Nehru attacked the question of the rights of minorities. in a plural and diverse society. Nehru and Ambedkar attacked the question of gender inequality through their reforms of personal laws and through the constitution which gave women the right to vote, which was unprecedented in history. In every other country, women had got the right to vote much after men. In some cases, 80 or 100 years after men. So, if you look at it as a historian and as a Democrat, the way I look at it is these were all great leaders. They were all animated partly by ambition, but more by conviction and compassion. Gandhi and Ambedkar worked heroically to undermine the institutional basis of untouchability. Gandhi and Nehru worked heroically to give minorities an equal right, equal citizenship. Nehru and Ambedkar worked to emancipate women. What all of them left out was the problem of the Adivasis. Nehru is the only one of the three leaders who talked at all about Adivasis. And not seriously, he talked a little bit. He admired their dance, their poetry, their music. But he did not recognize the structural roots of their exploitation. Gandhi simply thought that Adivasis were, part of the Hindu fold. And Ambedkar actually said Adivasis should not even have the right to vote. And he refused to club the Dalit question with the Adivasis. So if they had a blind spot, though they were remarkable, though they were great, though we owe them a colossal amount, these three Indians, in my view, with Tagore, they're the four greatest Indians of the 20th century. The conceptual blind spot they had was with regard to Adivasis. And so in their policies, in their politics, in what happened after independence, the predicament of the Adivasis was never seriously acted upon, which is why you have the conflicts now in the Naxalite movement, of which I don't approve. But it's a product of years and years of neglect and exploitation of the Adivasis. So in a sense, within this framework of the fourfold forms of social inequality, that's where I would place Gandhi, Nehru, and Ambedkar. That they addressed, and this is not a criticism. Not every person can address everything. I mean, they did as much as possible. But I'd urge you, especially looking at those three, there may be other people who are more motivated by ambition. Certainly today's politics, most people are motivated not by conviction but by ambition. But Gandhi, Nehru, and Ambedkar, this goes back to the point I made earlier on, when you have a debate with someone, don't accuse them of having motives. Look at their arguments and assess them for what they are. And if you agree, explain why you agree. If you disagree, explain why you disagree. But don't attribute motives. So-and-so is close to the Congress party, so-and-so is a Modi Bhakt, so-and-so has got a favor from so-and-so. That is not the way in which scholarship and intellectual debate can progress.
Sir, actually, my question is not answered, that's why. Yeah.
Hello. So unfortunately we're out of time, but thank you, sir, for so frankly and energetically spending time with us, talking to us, answering our questions for almost 2 hours non-stop. So on behalf of all the students and the staff, is it off? Is it on? Okay. So I just like to thank you for coming and spending time with us, and we hope we can keep doing things like this again and again. Yeah.